Good afternoon and happy September. I hope everyone is doing very well, healthy, and staying safe. The Hudson and I would like to extend the warmest possible welcome to you all. And on this very special Hot Topic series, I would like to begin with a land acknowledgement. It is with gratitude and with humility that we acknowledge that we are learning, speaking, and gathering on the ancestral homelands of the Mahikanac, who are the indigenous peoples of this land. Despite tremendous hardship in being forced from the land, today their community resides in Wisconsin and is known as the Stockbridge Massachusetts community. We wish to pay honor and respect to their ancestors past and present as we commit to building a more inclusive and equitable space for all, not only in Hudson and the Hudson Valley, but via our programming. My name is Jonah Beaucaire. I was born in New York State, quite close by, to Tunisian and American parents. I don't know if you knew this, but the Tunisian side of my family has indigenous blood in that land, which is a topic for another time. But I'm here to introduce our curator, Erin Levi Garvey, who curates the Hudson Eye annually, and to thank the J.M. Kaplan Fund, the City of Hudson Board of Tourism, the Common Council, our board of directors, many funders on the host committee, and Hudson Hall, from where we are broadcasting live. Humanities New York underwrites also some modest Zoom fees as well. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back for another round of the Hot Topics. This program we've put together as a lecture and panel series which looks at global issues and at the local level. So thinking globally and working locally. This is one issue and one bit of history and humanities series that we felt was important, specifically because we are so rooted in the Hudson Valley and Hudson as a whole. The Hudson Eye presents today's first contemporary arts panel discussion with the Mohiniac and Mohican tribal nation, with the Mohican historian Heather Bruegl, Mohican, and Dan Taulapapa McMullin, a local artist and American Samoan, Eastern Samoan. They will be in conversation with Indigenous poet and artist from Eastern Samoa, who is now the resident of Hudson. This discussion will look at the Indigenous histories of the Hudson River Valley and how contemporary Indigenous artists navigate and create and process in view of Indigenous and settler relations today. I wanted to remind everyone that there's a Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. Any questions that come up, please feel free to type them in, and then we'll either answer them live or I'll moderate a Q&A at the end of the discussion. All right, off to you, Dan.
Hello. I don't know if you can see me. My name is Dan Taulapapa McMullin. I'm Samoan from Eastern Samoa, which is a U.S. territory in the South Pacific, thousands of miles from here. And I partly grew up in California, and I moved to Hudson about 7 years ago with my partner, Stephen. We have an interest in history, and being indigenous to the South Pacific and living in an area that was colonized by the United States 100 years ago, I'm always very interested in what the Native people of a particular area are doing, and I'm living here in Hudson. We're visiting the Edna St. Vincent Millay House, and there's a statue of an Indian boy in the garden. And I thought, how strange that the first Native person I meet is the statue in the garden. And then later we're going to another historical house, and there was a statue of an Indian woman in a garden. And I thought, okay, this is the second Native person I've met. Neither one of them looked Native. They were classic European features, dressed in a Native costume that could have been from central casting in Hollywood. It was sort of Central Plains. And so I began doing some reading about Aupaumut and Quinny, and how the Native Americans, their capital was Mykonos, which is now Albany, and then they were forcibly relocated eventually to Wisconsin. So I'm here talking with Heather Bruegl, who is the cultural advisor. She's from Oneida Nation, and she's a cultural advisor with the Stockbridge Munsee Band of the Mohicans who live in Wisconsin. And I guess my first question for Heather would be, you've never been here, have you? What's it like talking to another Indigenous person who's living in your ancestral homelands from which your people were relocated, and you've never been here? I don't mean that facetiously, but it's just one of the strange things of contemporary life.
Yeah, no, that's a really great question. First, I want to thank everyone for putting this event together, and Dan for moderating. I think that's amazing. I just want to let people know, if we're hearing some noise in the background, I had to travel to Michigan this week for a doctor's appointment for my husband, and so I'm socially distancing in a Starbucks right now. So if you hear a little bit of noise, that's what you're hearing. But no, Dan, that's a great question. What's it like? Before the pandemic hit, I was actually supposed to be flying out to the homelands to one of the programs that I oversee working for the Stockbridge Munsee is our historic preservation program. And that office is located in the Mahikanatuk River Valley. And Mahikanatuk is what we call the Hudson River, the river that flows both ways. So I try to use the Indigenous name when I can. So, but yeah, I was supposed to be flying out there, and then the pandemic happened and everything got shut down, as it should have. But it was kind of exciting to think there was a great sense of feeling of going home when I was supposed to fly out there, and it was amazing, and I couldn't wait to get out there. And I'm glad that there are Indigenous people, living in that land right now, and kind of being a steward of that land. But it's an eerie feeling knowing that we're not there, because knowing that my ancestors lived and loved and died there and are buried in that land. It would have been great to be able to get out there. I'm hoping to make it out there, obviously, after everything settles down and it's safe to travel again. But yeah, it feels weird. I'm in Michigan, so I'm coming to you from the land of the Three Fires Council, which is the Ottawa, the Odawa, and the Potawatomi. So that's where I am currently. And if I was in Wisconsin, I would be coming to you from our reservation land in Wisconsin for the Stockbridge Munsee by the Treaty of 1856. And that's how we ended up there through a series of travels, which I'm soon going to talk about. But yeah, I mean, it's weird not being there, but I'm super glad that you are.
Well, thank you. Now, the name Stockbridge Munsee is the name of the tribe now. And when the Dutch lived here and were living here, as you'll see when you do visit, and I'd like to show you around when you do come, just to kind of introduce you to a place you might not know. It's beautiful here, and it's one of the reasons my partner and I live here, because the countryside is amazing. They're beautiful farms, and there are native names in a lot of places. And I don't know if we even know what a lot of those names mean now. But the Stockbridge Munsee tribe, the name of the tribe now, and even the word Mohican, there's a history there, because it was Mahikanak. And then I guess James Fenimore Cooper wrote a novel, and he combined the name of Mahikanak with Mohegan, which is another tribe. Was that what happened? Can you tell me about the name and how that was changed by literature, or what happened?
Yeah, so we are the peoples of the waters that are never still. We are the Mahikanu. Mahikanak is a place, so that would be where our council fires were, which would have been in the Albany area. And council fire is just like where we met, council meetings, gatherings, things like that. If you shorten Mahikanu, it's MAH, so Mahican. And then, of course, when James Fenimore Cooper wrote his infamous novel, Last of the Mohicans, M.O. So M-O-M-A, there's not a right, there's not a wrong. There's a preference that some people have. I don't have a preference either way. I usually just, I sometimes even forget to say Mohican. I just refer to myself as Oneida and Stockbridge Massachusetts. But yeah, so it wasn't, the only thing James Fenimore Cooper did was somehow put this in people's mind that the Mohican people did not exist anymore. And we do. We have a beautiful, vibrant community in Wisconsin. While we might not be in the Mahitanatuck River Valley, we still have a vibrant community going on right now. So yeah, so that's something we try to combat every day is James Fenimore Cooper was not the expert on the Mohican people. We are still here, we are still around, and we are still vibrant.
So we can safely say that The Last of the Mohicans, that novel, will not tell you anything about the Mohicans, really.
Correct. It is written from a purely fictional aspect. I love a good novel, but...
It's basically science fiction.
Yes.
Now, there were various sachems who are the leaders of the Mohican people, and they were at war a lot with the Mohawks, weren't they? I believe, but there were. I know there's a famous group of paintings called Four Mohawk Chiefs who visited Queen Anne in England, but one of them was Mohican, and then later there's a great history of this area, and it's really the first history of this area by Hendrik Aupaumut, who was a later sachem or leader of the Mohicans. And he wrote a great history of this valley, and he talked about the Three Sisters, which are which was the growing farming practice of this valley, the indigenous farming practice of this valley. Could you talk a little bit about, I know you're not a farmer, but you have done some gardening, about the Three Sisters and especially about Hendrik Aupaumut and about his relationship to the United States and how they fought for the United States in the Revolution and how they were essentially punished for fighting for the United States, and they relocated. I mean, that's how I would put it, but you may put it in a different way. But I just want to talk about.
Yeah, for sure. So at the founding of the United States, so way back in the 1700s, the United States declared independence in 1776. We were in the midst of an American Revolution or Civil War, however you want to look at it, with Great Britain. And a lot of the tribes in the Northeast area, so Massachusetts, New York, Pennsylvania, all of them, they kind of picked sides. The Iroquois Confederacy actually broke up because of the American Revolution, because you had some of the tribes that were fighting with the colonists and some of the tribes that were fighting with the crown. And so like the Oneida fought, the tribe that I am an enrolled citizen of, fought with the colonists. The Mohicans also fought with the colonists. You had the Stockbridge militia, which fought many great battles. One of them was the Battle of Van Cortlandt, which is kind of in Brooklyn, in the Brooklyn area. There's like a monument to the Stockbridge militia. And so after the revolution, George Washington actually celebrated with the Mohican people. Like there was, in our home in Stockbridge, Massachusetts, there was like an ox roast, and it was like a great thank you to helping us, helping fight the revolution. And then shortly after that celebration, we were forced westward even more. And same with like the Oneida is after the Treaty of Paris was signed, which concreted the U.S. freedom, they were moved also westward. And so a lot of the tribes, you really don't have any tribes in that New England northeastern area anymore because they were all moved out after the revolution, after they fought on the side of the colonists, which is kind of interesting to think about. And then
that was by an act of Congress, wasn't it? It was the Indian Relocation Act. It was by an act of Congress.
Yeah, well, Indian relocation happened in 1836. So that happened much later on. This was the start of the birth of the United States. And so it was right after the war. So Andrew Jackson was actually responsible for Indian removal that happened later on, which led to the Trail of Tears and things like that.
So it would have actually been probably Washington and Congress in the first Congress that were involved in the relocation of the out of Hudson.
Right, absolutely. And it was through land secessions, and we would get to an area and we would start a town and we would start, growing crops and having, schools. And then it's like we would get everything going and then we were forced to move again. So it's like we would do the groundwork, and then settlers would come in and do their own thing, and we would have to be moved westward. And Aupaumut was actually, he was a lawyer and he was a diplomat, in addition to being one of our leaders, along with John Quinney and several others. And he petitioned hard to make sure that, we had titles and deeds to our lands. And that he fought very, very hard for our people. I like to say that there's a book that's called Nation of Statesmen, and it's about the political aspects of the Stockbridge Massachusetts and how they used diplomacy to help our people. Aupaumut did a lot of things, and like a lot of other people who live in that area, who farmed, and the way we farmed was like, I know you mentioned Three Sisters. I do not have a green thumb at all, but we have planted gardens before you plant your garden, and Three Sisters consist of corn, squash, and beans. And they're planted together because they kind of grow together. And so like you plant the corn first, it grows tall, then you plant your beans, and beans are kind of viney in how they grow. And the beans kind of, wrap around the corn stalk, and then the squash comes and it kind of grows out. And they grow really well together because each plant gives off different nutrient into the soil that kind of feeds the other plant. So it's a very smart way of doing your planting. I know we have up on our reservation in Wisconsin, we have a community garden, and the way we plant our corn, squash, and beans up there is we do it the Three Sisters method. So we try to do it in as many traditional ways as we possibly can. But and we kind of took those. So with each move, we kind of took those traditions with us as we were doing things. So yeah, there was a lot that happened to push us out of the way, but we had great leaders like Aupaumut who made sure that our interests were being heard.
Yeah. And Quinney was another one who I want to talk about in just a minute, but I did want to touch on in Hendrik Aupaumut, who we're talking about now, wrote a wonderful history, and if you go to Wikipedia and look him up, Aupaumut, you'll see a link to this history he wrote, and it's the Mohicans were here for thousands of years, weren't they? They're here for thousands of years, and they were farming here for thousands of years, and having a stable culture here, a sustainable one.
Yeah.
Years. They had totems, and they had a religion, but a lot of the settlers didn't want them to become Christian because they were afraid that they would they would stay here. They wanted to push them out, and so there were. But a lot of the native people converted to Christianity, and I think the Moravians were here down on Pine Plains, and they started a mission or whatever you call it. They started a church, and they were pushed out from there. And so there are various efforts, and there was kind of a mixture of Indian traditional practices, of worship, of spirit. I don't know what the name is in the King spirit. But and then there was also a mixture with Christianity. And then that had something to do with them moving to Stockbridge and the Munsee, or Lenape from further south, consolidating because of the decimation of native peoples all over North and South America and the Pacific Islands, where up to 90% of native populations were killed by the introduction of European diseases. So there was a huge decimation of the population by these European introduced diseases, and it weakened the entire social structure. And but Stockbridge, so people began to consolidate, and Stockbridge was a center in Massachusetts, just east of us. And can you tell us about Stockbridge and about Quinny, and about how that became a center for the Mohicans who were in the upper Hudson River Valley, all the way up Lake George, to the top of Lake George, into Vermont, and into the upper Housatonic River. But they kind of they had to kind of consolidate because of all these things that were happening in Stockbridge.
Yeah, for sure. So Stockbridge, Massachusetts, located in the Berkshire area, was also a Mohican village. And so there was John Sargent, John Sargent, yeah. He was a missionary who came into that area and asked permission from the Mohicans in that area to set up a mission to start kind of to evangelize to the Mohicans that were there, to the people who were there. And so they started a mission. So there's still standing, it's on Main Street, is the mission house. And that mission house is very significant in our history because that's where a lot of our people converted to Christianity. So kind of gave up like traditional religion and converted to Christianity. And John Sargent was the missionary in that area for an extremely long time. And that's also kind of how we became the Stockbridge Indians. That's how Stockbridge became part of our name, is because it was a Mohican village, and then so it had a Mohican name, which I cannot pronounce off the top of my head without looking at it, and I don't have it in front of me. So, but then when John Sargent moved in and the mission was created, they gave it the English name of Stockbridge, from Stockbridge, England. And so it was there, so we were known as the praying Indians at first because we were Christianized very early on, and then we became known as the Stockbridge Indians. And you're right when you mentioned that in that area, a lot of other tribes joined up, so the Lenape, some Oneida, the Wappingers, Pequot, Brotherton, all kind of consolidated to this area, and we started traveling together. So then we became the Stockbridge Munsee Indians, and Munsee is also kind of refers to Lenape and a dialect of the language that was spoken. So for our tribe, we have two languages. We have the Munsee language and we have the Mohican language. So we kind of just all traveled together. So we became the Stockbridge Munsee Indians. But it was also when we were at Stockbridge that in 1745, we were gifted two very large volumes of the Bible from the chaplain to the Prince of Wales in England, because he was so impressed with how quickly and easily we took to Christianity, and we gave up our savage ways, so to speak. And we have those Bibles in our museum in Wisconsin. They traveled with us. They're very large and they're very heavy. So they were important enough for people to, keep bringing them along with every stop along our journey. So Stockbridge was a very important and significant place. And
I know being Polynesian, and how when Polynesia became Christianized, in a way we were sort of forced to by colonization, but in a way we were also kind of looking to survive in the modern life. We were kind of surrounded,
exactly.
And we had to survive, and the only way we could survive is by becoming Christian. Because
right, and that's kind of what I look at it as. They had to give up so much, but I look at it as a way of surviving. And I think about if they hadn't given up their traditional religions, would I be able to be sitting here today talking to you
Exactly.
about our history? Yes.
And so when people look at our ancestors and they say, well, you did this, you did that, it was survival, it was that or death, basically.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And the United States actually outlawed Native religion until when?
1978.
1978.
Mhm.
That's pretty bizarre in a country that espouses freedom of religion. 1978
Right.
is, I remember 1978 very well. I don't know if you do, but I remember 1978.
I do not remember. I was not even a twinkle in anyone's eye in 1978.
Okay, we'll leave that as it is. And we haven't really gotten to Quinny yet, but was he part of the move when the Mohicans were forcibly relocated to Wisconsin, where you are now? And
Yes, yeah, he was, Quinny was our sachem during that move. John Quinny, John W. Quinny. He is actually on July 4th, 1854, gave a very powerful speech on basically the 4th of July and what it means to Native people. And he shared his concerns in that speech for the demise of his people. He was worried his people weren't going to exist anymore. And, you know, we've done everything the government wants us to do. What more are you asking of us? And, you know, he just really wanted to make sure that his people were well taken care of. But yes, our first stop in Wisconsin was down in Kokana, Wisconsin, which is near Lake Winnebago in the southern part of the state. So we were in Kokana, and then we were in Stockbridge, Wisconsin. And then from Stockbridge, Wisconsin, we moved up to where our current reservation is. So he was there. He did not reside on our current reservation. He stayed, when we moved, he stayed down there in Stockbridge. He had land and home, and so he did not move with us, but he was instrumental in making sure that our people's voices were heard. He was a true diplomat, John Quinny, in every essence of the word. He made numerous trips to Washington to lobby on the behalf of his people to make sure even our lands in New York were still, you know, like he tried to retain rights to our lands in New York, and we just weren't able to. So he really lobbied, and John Quinny is somebody that our tribe looks to with great admiration. I mean, true diplomat in the true essence of the word.
I think I saw a beautiful painting of him.
Yes. Yeah, he's sitting very distinguished.
Yeah, it's an amazing painting.
Yeah.
And these people were heroes because Congress and the administrations of those times had no intention of giving Indians back their land. They were not interested in helping them. They were interested in acquiring more land for American empire.
Exactly. I mean, you have in 1836, you have the Indian Removal Act signed into law by Andrew Jackson, which led to the Trail of Tears. Not just in the south part of the United States, but also in the northern part of the United States. More happened in the southern part of the United States because we were kind of being removed from the start of Henry Hudson coming into that river valley and settlement happening and moving kind of eastward. But by the time that the Cherokee and the Choctaw and the Chickasaw were all moved, and numerous other tribes, by the time they were removed to Indian Territory, which would have been west of the Mississippi River in the state of Oklahoma, that was Indian Territory, it opened up 25 million acres of land. And what happened in the South? We know that plantations popped up, and cotton and tobacco, and all of that. So it led to more farming and agriculture in the South, but it also helped lead to the spread of slavery. So they were moving the native tribes out in order to enslave another group of people. So removal in all aspects of it was not good at all.
This in a way was the Middle Passage of Native Americans, and Native Americans were enslaved as well by Americans. Almost the entire tribe, the entire Indian population of Massachusetts was enslaved and sent to the West Indies. And a lot of Native Americans, found common cause with African Americans, and a lot of Native Americans on the East Coast, those families combined with African American families on the East Coast. I know that, as well as European American families. What before we're about to go to question and answer, I think, and I open up to the community here for questions. But I just wanted to ask one more question: is what kind of interactions would you hope for with? We call it the city of Hudson. It's 6,000 people. I don't know. It was a city at one time. It was going to be the capital of New York State, I think, at one time. I mean, I would call it a town or even a village, but okay, the city of Hudson, and it's a beautiful city, beautiful countryside. But how do you hope to interact as the cultural representative of the Mohican tribe? How do you hope to interact with the city in the future?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And one of my goals is to have more of a presence out east, particularly in our homelands. So along, the Mahikanatuk River, in the Mahikanatuk River Valley, in areas where we inhabited, my goal is to have more of a presence out there through things like this. So I'm very excited, that the Hudson Eye reached out and, wanted to include that history, wanted to give a voice to the people whose land that this amazing panel is taking place on, this major event. And I think that's huge. And so my goal, and the pandemic has definitely opened up more time because we're not traveling. So I think people have, they're able to do other things. So, we've had cultural and educational institutions reach out to us and say, hey, how can we incorporate your history into our facility? And it's a lot of work, and sometimes I'm tired and I just want to say no to every request, but at the same time I say yes, because I think it's super important to make sure that the history of the Mohican people is taught and is known in the area where we once lived. When you think of New York, you don't think of Native Americans, you think of Brooklyn and Manhattan and Albany and all these places. But those were all native settlements, all native villages. Native people, like I said earlier, lived, loved, and died, in that land. And so that's something that we really want. That's my goal, is to really just have more of a presence out there, to be a voice out there, and to, make sure we have a finger on everything that's happening, that Mohican history and the Mohican people are not forgotten about.
Well, I hope we have more conversations in future. And it is important to remember that when people represent their people, that it really is up to all of this. And then we know this from Black Lives Matter, that it's really up to all of us to own this history, because it is, in a sense, a mutual history. It's really something for us all to take on, and not just for the representatives to be burdened by that, but it's for us to reach out and to support what you're doing. And speaking of reaching out, how would people reach you?
So we have a Facebook page, which is the R.V.E. Miller Library and Museum and Cultural Affairs Department. You can also reach me on our webpage, which is mohican.com. You're going to go to the Cultural Affairs tab, and you'll find me in there. And I will just, my email is very simple. It's heather.bruegl, so my name, at mohican-nsn.gov. Been super busy lately, so it might take a minute for me to get back to you, but I respond to every single email.
Awesome. I'm so honored to talk to you, Heather. And feel like I should go to Aaron so I can do question and answer, because
Yeah, I'd love any questions or answers. Questions, that would be awesome.
I would just also like to thank Aaron and Jonah for curating this and for creating these opportunities, and for really, I don't know how they do it. It's 11 days. It's massive. It's all over town. It's so I'll shut up.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Heather. This has been incredible. You know, when we were putting the panel series together, this was something that we thought was really important to add, as you had mentioned. You know, last year, one of the focuses was on land use and farming and understanding the land. And I think that this kind of segues, they go hand in hand, you know, really talking about why people are on this land now, who was on the land before us, and being sensitive and understanding the lands and the peoples that were here. So this was the very first topic that we came up with. We're like, we have to talk about these histories. This is no joke. Like, this has to be the one, and then we just kind of built it out from there. So we do have a number of questions, so I'm gonna go through them from earliest to most recent. We have some folks that are asking for the spelling of the nations and different histories that Dan had mentioned. So maybe we can put those in the chat just to all attendees. And then looking it up on Wikipedia, it says that the bulk of the descendants of the Mohegans that were pushed west into Wisconsin from Stockbridge, Muncie, reside in Shawano County near Green Bay. Assuming that is true, 1, have you ever been there? And 2, how much of their traditional culture and historical awareness has been retained? And that's from Stephen Dunn.
Yeah, so our 1856 reservation is located in Shawano County, Wisconsin. The county seat is Shawano, which is, I'm from the Detroit area, so I'm from used to big cities. So the county seat has a population of 9,000, so it's like, to me, that's a tiny little town compared to where I'm from. I actually live I do not live on the reservation. I live in the county that it's in, and I live about a half hour from the reservation, so I do drive in every morning. As far as cultures and traditions, so yes, number 1, I have been to Shawano County because I live there. But culture and traditions, that's my department, cultural affairs, and so we are working on a language revitalization right now of our Mohican language. We like to say that it was asleep for a really long time, and now we're waking it back up. We host powwow every year. We did not have a powwow this year, obviously due to the pandemic, but we've just moved that cultural aspect to virtual, so we're going to have like a virtual powwow, which is going to be interesting, but we're all making things work. So we do still try to hold to traditional ceremony, traditional way of dress for ceremony, language. So there's a lot that we're finding out, and a lot that we're still trying to do in the same time.
What strides are you taking to take the language out of hibernation? Like what tactics are you using? Are you making books, or are you teaching classes? Like how is the hibernation ending?
Yeah, so we actually worked with a linguist out of Hamilton, Ontario, Canada, who is about to have the only PhD in the world in Mohican language. He works with the Indigenous Language Institute in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and we found him through YouTube, through lectures that he had given.
Amazing.
So, and in order to kind of wake the language back up, we went back to documents that had the language in it, and kind of figured out how the words might have been said, and used that as a basis to create not new words, but to kind of put together the old words. We've been doing that, and it took off immensely in the community. We have little ones, toddlers, who are saying Mohican words now, which is, so it's still in the very beginning stages, but it's something that's progressively working. We do offer language classes. We were doing them in person prior to the pandemic. Now we're doing them online, and they are open to anyone, not just community members. So,
and where can people find those?
Yeah, so you can email me, and we can get you set up with that. You can also look at our website, which is mohican.com. But on Monday nights, and this is all Central Time because it's in Wisconsin, so Monday nights, 5:30 Central, we offer our Muncie classes, and Wednesday nights, 5:30 Central, we offer Mohican classes. And so you can email me. I give your information to our instructors. They will send you a Google link before class starts, and you just sign into class that way.
Amazing, amazing.
If I could just say, I think it's important to remember, not to put in a sour note, but that when in the missions, in the schools, and a lot of Native children were forced to go to these schools, where the language was outlawed within the schools. They were not allowed to speak English language. So Native children who were separated from their parents in a lot of boarding schools, I'm not sure if it was with the Mohicans, but I know it was in a lot of Native societies, were their Native languages were outlawed. And this had a lot to do with the loss of Native language. And so, but what's happening now in a lot of Native nations is language immersion schools for children and the revitalization of Native languages. And language is key to what's happening in the Indigenous culture movement. It's really
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you.
A follow-up question. We have a lot of questions, so I'm gonna just go in order, all right? How do the panelists feel about land acknowledgements? When and where is it appropriate? Is a land acknowledgement given in the email a good one to use?
We do have an extraordinary number of questions, so I would like to give voice to these, and I think it's a compliment to these panelists. This is probably the most questions we've received, so bravo.
The land acknowledgement that we, thank you, Jonah.
It's an incredible subject too, so let's go for it.
Jonah, I love Jonah. He's always so supportive and wonderful. The land acknowledgement we have on the website is actually your official land acknowledgement, isn't it?
Yes, it's the one that us as a department put together and got approved by our tribal council. We get a lot of requests for land acknowledgements for things that are happening out east in our territories, and so we wanted to put something together where it's acknowledging the people who were there, acknowledging where we are at today, and acknowledging the goals that we hope that you're committing on these spaces, which is, learning and educating and creating equitable space for everyone. And as far as when and where you should use a land acknowledgement, anytime. I did a lecture last night for a local library here in Michigan, virtually, and I start all of my lectures with a land acknowledgement for whoever's land that I'm on, because it's super important to acknowledge you weren't first. You were not the first peoples here, and there's blood in that land, and there's heart in that land, and it's super important. So I think anytime you can do a land acknowledgement, I mean, I'm not saying you have to do it at your Easter dinner, but if you're having a presentation at a library or a museum or any other cultural or educational institution, it's absolutely super important to do it. And I did put my email in the chat for everyone, for all panelists and attendees. That way you can contact me with any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Heather.
Yeah.
So the follow-up question, ideas for how to involve the Mohican culture actively into institutions in Hudson. Example, I am working on a project with Basilica Hudson that includes a garden and a library. We have an Indigenous advisor, Scott Manning Stevens, but we are looking for a connection to the Mohican people to advise practitioners and to commission projects and works.
You contact us, 100% contact us. And again, because we're getting so many of these right now, it might take me a minute to get back to you, but I'm going to get you in touch with someone in our department who's going to be able to guide you through whatever you need. I always say, go to the source. You want to incorporate Mohican history, Mohican culture into your facility. You you go to the Mohicans. So yeah, just contact me directly. Yep.
Okay. Victor Golden has a question. I'm interested in Native artists of the period. I teach in the Humanities and Fine Arts department at Broward College. This semester of the course, I am approaching the course with such amazing historical facts. Any insights on artists from the nation or throughout history that you would kind of point to?
Yeah, so we actually presently, contemporary-wise, we have a lot of artists in our communities, whether that be writers, painters, sculptors, actors, actresses.
Hello.
We have a lot in our community, so you could reach out to me, and I can get you more names and get you more information on exactly, because I want to make sure I ask you, when you email me, I ask you a ton of questions because I want to make sure I'm pointing you in the right direction.
Excellent. Amazing. All right, Victor, you have some homework. Edward Morris, can Heather share her contact information? We've already done that. So Sam Pratt, a lot of the information about the Mohican culture, which appears in local and state histories, appears to derive from unreliable reports made by a handful of European missionaries and colonists. What are some good resources to...
And I just wanted to say Will Coleman has clarified his name.
Yes, I
Please
see that.
continue. Great.
What are some good resources to learn more from the perspective of Mohicans about their presence in the Hudson Valley?
Yeah, so a couple of books that we have that we sell in our library, museum, gift shop, which if you want any of these and you want to support our museum and our education programs, we do ship, so you can contact me via email and I can get your information and ship them to you. A Nation of Statesmen is a really good book. It talks about what Dan and I talked about earlier with diplomatic political relationship between the Mohican Nation and the U.S. government. Mohicans and Their World and the Mohicans and Their Land by Shirley Donner, also very good books. The Mohicans of Stockbridge is another good one, and a lot of these books that I'm telling you, they have consulted with us. And so they might be written by a non-native person, but it's a non-native person who works in conjunction with us to tell our history. You can also check out our website. We do have some history on our website as well, mohican.com, and you can follow us on Facebook.
Amazing. Thank you, Heather.
Yeah.
All right, and so Will Coleman asks, I'd love to hear more about the art of Stockbridge Massachusetts. Are there key objects in public collections, whether in Wisconsin or New York? Also, where can you direct us?
Yeah, so I'll talk about our museum that we have on the reservation. It's a small little museum. We're actually working towards building a larger cultural center. That's why I got hired to help do this. But we house a lot of our beadwork, leather making, through people who were really good at that, past and present. The New York State Museum also has an amazing collection of our beadwork as well, which we were actually going to feature this year in my museum during our powwow. But that all got canceled, but I'm still in very good contact with the New York State Museum. So you can look to us, you can look to the New York State Museum, NMAI, the National Museum of the American Indian, and Smithsonian also has a very vast collection. A lot of the things that I'm seeing is beadwork or painted photo pictures on leather or different animal hides. I can get you more information, but definitely, we have some amazing artists in our community that it's so wonderful to see the work that they've done, past and present.
This could bring up the question of the return of so few Native pieces are actually in Native hands. They're in a lot of museums, and I think you have a representative in Albany maybe working on this, Bonnie.
We do. We have our historic preservation office is located in Troy, New York. so across the river from Albany. And Bonnie Hartley, who is my Tribal Historic Preservation Manager, she oversees that program. And that works with repatriation of ancestors and objects. And also we consult on Section 106, which is any construction or anything that's going to do any ground disturbance anywhere in our territory. They have to consult with us first so we can make sure that it's not a sensitive area, or like you can dig here but you can't dig here, sort of thing. So yeah, we do have that. Most of the stuff that we are talking about today, Bonnie will actually send my way. So you can email her, but she'll send the email my way.
That was something I was thinking about, and you know, you mentioned the New York State Museum, and that was, you know, I used to go there constantly as a kid, and then now as an adult and a professional, and you know, seeing these objects on view, and I started to wonder, what about repatriation, like having the works and these objects go back to the nation, and how often are you dealing with that? How often are you being approached unsolicited to have people send things back to the nation, or is it more often than not that you are making the request to receive objects back? And how are you navigating that, and how regularly is that happening?
Yeah, so in the time that I've worked for the nation, we haven't been approached by anyone. We are doing the approaching, and repatriation takes a bit of time because you have to go through, you have to go through the federal registry, and then things have to be posted for 30 days, and then there's a whole big mess. And sometimes they don't go very easily. Sometimes cultural institutions don't want to return the object, and you kind of, it's interesting because you kind of have to jump through hoops to get your own stuff back. I will tell you, we've had an extremely easy repatriation with a museum in Wisconsin. We last year, one of the first big things that I did when I started is we had an open house at our museum during our powwow weekend, and I was able to bring in objects from out east and a couple of objects from Wisconsin that were in museums that related to our history. One of the objects that came from one of the museums in Wisconsin, we belonged to one of our sachems, John Quinney. And so we were able to write a report, myself and Bonnie, because she does that. We were able to write a report to explain the cultural significance of this object, and that even though it was his, it didn't really belong to him, it belonged to the community because he was one of our leaders. And this repatriation went so smoothly. It was, when I returned the objects back after we were done with our loan, I walked in, I handed it back to the museum, and I said, I want to let you know we're going to put in paperwork to repatriate this. And they said, absolutely, what can we do to help? And that's not a reaction you get all the time. And so it went very smoothly. I think we're just finishing up the federal part of it right now. So we should be bringing this object back home to us on the reservation before fall, which is really exciting. So it does, it takes a hot second, especially with when we are repatriating ancestors.
That was my follow-up question about remains and ancestors, and how does that, a lot of people might not know how that differentiates between an object and one of your ancestors, and kind of how does that work?
Yeah, so for ancestors, you go through something where you culturally affiliate the remains, or they remain unidentified under the NAGPRA law, which is the law that allows us, that's supposed to make it easy for us to repatriate ancestors. Our oral traditions are held at the same standard as science. So I went through a repatriation of ancestors back in November through a museum in Chicago, and it was a little difficult to get them affiliated, even though we knew we had evidence that showed you got them, not the museum, but the person who dug them up got them from this area. And they were just very hesitant to affiliate the remains. Regardless, we got them back, it didn't matter. But it is also a longer process, and you have to go through the federal registry as well. In my experience, it's a longer process to get back ancestors. Objects, sometimes I feel like they might put up a little bit more of a roadblock, because then you're taking something from one museum
Right.
and bringing it home, and so it's not something they can have on display anymore.
Mm-hmm. Are you finding anyone that often is maybe has a home and they're doing construction and they find objects and remains and then approach you?
Have not run into that yet.
Okay.
I've heard stories from other NAGPRA representatives from other nations who have had that happen.
Mm-hmm.
I have not run into that yet in my time with the nation.
Mm-hmm. Oh, we just got another question. I'm curious to hear more about the equivalence between oral tradition and science. I'm quite interested in what counts as evidence in different worldviews.
So that's a good question. So archaeology is a science, and it can tell you, through archaeology and anthropology, you can measure bones and you can affiliate them that way. Our oral traditions, because those are our stories, that's our way of proving where we were. In the NAGPRA law is written to have the same importance as science. So we can actually come in and say something because we've got it from oral tradition, it's been written down or what have you, and say we know that those remains that are dug up from whatever farm or whatever area might have been are, Mohican, because during this time period we had a village that was set up here, or we know in the winter this is where our winter camps would be, or what have you. So we know that through our own archaeology as well, and I'm very excited because we have an archaeologist on staff, and not every nation does, and so we were able to have that as it works in our advantage. So it's because you might consider it like folklore or history or whatever. It's not. Under NAGPRA, our stories, our history is like right up there with science.
So what's my personal question, what's next? What's on the horizon for the work that you're doing right now? What is in 2021? What's happening?
Yeah, so my team is working on their goals right now. But one of the reasons I was hired was we want to create, in the museum that we're in now, we're running out of space. It wasn't built to be a museum. So the building I'm in was built in the 1970s. We are currently, before the pandemic hit, I went to a conference in Chicago where I was basically learning how to create a cultural center. And that is what the next plan is the next plan is to start fundraising and finding grants, because we want to build a state-of-the-art cultural center to house our Mohican history, because we have the largest Mohican archives in the world. We are the Mohicans, like people who started our historical society and our language revitalization. They traveled out east to bring back history. And so one of the things that we want to do is we want to create a cultural center that houses our library, our museum, our historic preservation offices, and our language revitalization offices. So the next step is in addition to bringing more virtual programming, which you can follow us on Facebook for that, because we're doing a lot of Zoom and Facebook Lives, because we want people to see things, and we want you to stay safe in your home. But we're going to be putting together fundraising and trying to find the funds, because this is, while a lot of tribes are hurting right now, they're in recovery because of the pandemic. Money had to have been spent that they didn't know they were going to have to spend, and it makes sense. We didn't know a pandemic was coming. My goal is to fundraise and build this cultural center without tribal contribution funds. So I've got my work cut out for me. So that is what my focus is grant writing and fundraising for 2021.
Okay. And we all know how to reach you for any further questions. You've been so generous with providing that information. Thank you for giving out your email and contact information, and such an incredible talk. Thank you.
And thank you to you and to Jonah and to Alina and to Dan for this amazing show that you guys are putting together. I appreciate it, and I appreciate you reaching out to the Mohican people and asking us to be part of it.
Now we have to bring you to Hudson
humbled.
at some point. We need to have you for a visit.
Yes, I would love to. Like literally a week before the pandemic hit, I was supposed to fly out. So.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's make arrangements.
Yes, let's do it.
Okay. Thank you again, Dan, Heather. Thank you, everyone that's attended today. Thank you so much. This series is really the heartbeat of the Hudson Eye, and we are really trying to have as wide a swath of just important topics and important information that we can share with our community and our community members and the reach that our community has. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Looking forward to seeing everyone tomorrow.
I harmonize with Aaron.
Tomorrow we have the Black Arts and Culture Festival organized by Elena Mosley, and she'll be talking about the Black Arts Museums. This evening we have Litany by the John Ashbery and Flowchart Foundation. So looking forward to seeing the rest of our community both in person and virtually.
I would like to harmonize with Aaron by concluding and reminding us all of the lands that we live on, that today the land acknowledgements have been updated on all websites, so you've sort of been our ribbon cutting. We encourage other organizations to do the same in Hudson, and to remind and to point on the program alignment level that Dan's beautiful and breathtaking art focus on Polynesia can be enjoyed daily from 11 to 5 at 400 State Street, and to say that our Brooklyn facilities to acknowledge the Lenape people, and that our board members who hail from the from actually 4 tribes in Colorado on native lands have really come together to support some of the fees for this year's festival. So let's all do better in Hudson, and let's all do better as a nation.
Thank you, Jonah. Thank you, Heather. Thank you, Dan.
Thanks.
Take care, everyone.
Bye, folks. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.